What's up, y'all? My name is JR, and for those of you who don't already know, I'm a huge movie and TV nerd. If you're new here, I appreciate you taking the time to check out my channel. I hope you'll consider sticking around and joining the film community I'm trying to build here on YouTube. So in today's video, I'm going to be breaking down the fourth episode in season 2 of HBO's hit TV show, House of the Dragon. And just so you guys know, this video will contain spoilers, so if you haven't gotten around to watching the episode yet and you don't want to know anything that happens in it, you might want to exit this video now. And with that being said, no more wasting time. Let's get into it. So, this episode starts with Daemon entering a nearly empty throne room in King's Landing, alone, as he walked towards a young Rhaenyra who is seated on the throne. And she speaks to him, but her voice is muffled, so he cannot understand what she is saying. But he keeps walking towards her until finally he demands that she speak plainly. She stands up from her seated position and approaches Daemon just as he reaches the steps. Now, at that point, we can now hear her speaking in High Valyrian, explaining that it was Daemon that created her, and now he seems set on destroying her. All because his brother loved her more than he did him. Daemon then responds to this by cutting off young Rhaenyra's head with Dark Sister, causing the crown that she's wearing, Viserys' crown, to hit the floor. And her head now separated from her body, Rhaenyra continues speaking, explaining that this is always what Daemon wanted. And as Daemon stands there looking at what he's done, Rhaenyra says one last thing. There's been a raven. Now, at that point, Daemon is awakened by a servant stirring in his bedchamber. And at first, Daemon sees his hand soaked in blood. But as he continues to come to, the blood disappears and he realizes that he was dreaming, having been awakened by Sir Simon with news. Now, in the next scene, as Sir Simon and Daemon move throughout the castle, Sir Simon informs Daemon that Aegon's army departed King's Landing a fortnight prior, and that castles Stokeworth and Rosby had since fallen without siege, that they had both raised Aegon's banner and added their number to his host, both citing the death of Aegon's son as the reason. Now he goes on to tell Daemon that he fears Harrenhal is Sir Criston's destination, and that even if he can raise an army of rivermen, that they may not be ready in time to face him. Now, Daemon thinks for a moment before he answers simply, "Let's see what your Lord Paramount is made of." Now, from there, we see Daemon enter the hall to find not Lord Grover Tully, but his grandson Sir Oscar instead, being that he is Lord Grover's heir, and that his grandfather, as has been stated several times in previous episodes, is too old and frail to do essentially anything. Anyway, Daemon sits down with Sir Oscar and asks after his grandfather's health. Sir Oscar tells him that Lord Grover remains incapacitated, unable to do much more than take a meager drink. Daemon asks Sir Oscar if he might consider doing away with his grandfather so as to provide Daemon with the army he seeks, which seems to confound this poor young man. And Sir Oscar denies Daemon's request as humbly as he can before Daemon asks if he has the authority to speak for his grandfather, for House Tully, and for the Riverlands. Now, Sir Oscar tells him that he cannot while his grandfather is still alive, as that is not their way, and Daemon responds, then you are of no use to me. He goes on to state that he understands why the Brackens did not fear to start a war beneath the nose of their liege lord, as he proclaims House Tully is a fish with no head. He then asks Sir Simon which of the two houses pledged to fight in the name of Aegon. Sir Simon tells him that it was House Bracken. He tells him to summon the men of House Blackwood then, and he gets up from the table and exits the room. From there, we see Rhaenys approaching the docks at Driftmark. Now, she approaches Alan of Hull and begins to question him. She tells him that she understands that her husband owes him his life. And then, as she examines the look of him, she realizes who he is, and she even touches his face, as she tells him that his mother must have been very beautiful. Now, at that moment, Corlys discovers her, and he calls out to her, telling Alan essentially to get back to work. Now, Rhaenys then explains to Corlys that she just had words with his captains and has learned that Alan is the sailor who saved his life. She asks why Corlys did not think to mention it to her. He tells her that he did not think it relevant. She explains that she knows who he is and that his past is no fault of his. She tells Corlys that he saved his lord's life, that he should be raised up and honored, not hidden beneath the tides. Corlys asks Rhaenys if she came to subject him to an inquisition. She tells him that Baela has called her to Dragonstone to help her and Jacaerys deal with the lords on Rhaenyra's council. Corlys asks where Rhaenyra has gone. Rhaenys tells Corlys that she expects Rhaenyra is trying to draw them all back from the abyss before she storms off. And, in this particular scene, we see Rhaenys is still trying to get Corlys to find and name an heir to Driftmark. You can tell that even Rhaenys feels that either her time or that of her husband's is short. And so she is seeking to see that all is in order with her family before the real fighting starts. And she appears to want that pretty badly. Badly enough to try and make Corlys name his bastard son Alan heir to Driftmark, apparently. Now, next in King's Landing, we find Alicent playing with Viserys' dragon idol from his Valyrian Lego set. There's a knock at the door, and she drops the piece on the floor for a second time. That's the second time this dragon idol has been broken. And Grand Maester Orwell enters the room, apparently with a Starbucks order for her. It's a venti moon tea, explaining that he brewed it himself. She thanks him and tells him that she shall see it delivered discreetly. Maester Orwell tells her to let him know if the recipient has any further need of remedy, as the tea has a tendency to disagree with the gut. Now, Alicent thanks him and tells him that she will watch the girl closely. Grand Maester Orwell nods, and then he moves to exit the room. But before he leaves, Alicent asks him if he thought that Viserys intended for Aegon to be king. And Grand Maester Orwell simply tells Alicent that he could not know because his grace never raised the matter with him. And here we get two things. One, Alicent is preggers. And there's no doubt who the baby daddy is. But I mean, that's what you get for humping around all over the Red Keep. So the way I see it, you play stupid games, you win stupid prizes. And two, the conversation she had in the Great Sept with, Septa Rhaenyra has indeed had an effect on her. As Alicent is here trying to decipher if what Rhaenyra told her about the Song of Ice and Fire being just a story and not a declaration of Viserys' wishes is indeed true. And if so, what to do about it, if she can do anything about it at all at this point. And, I also want you guys to think about this for a second. We know that the Song of Ice and Fire isn't just a story. It's legend. And take note that when Alicent mentioned the prince that was promised, Rhaenyra didn't expound on what it meant, because she doesn't mean for Alicent to have that information. That means that Rhaenyra has always intended to fight over her claim, not because it was in the best interest of all of Westeros, but because she wanted to be queen. And there's nothing wrong with that, as I'm sure many others would have done the same if they had been named heir, especially publicly. But this idea that she herself was the prince that was promised, simply because her daddy said she was, is the kind of thing I've been telling people is classic Rhaenyra. It just speaks to her overly inflated sense of self-importance, which was actually cope for the fact that her father never really paid her the attention that she wanted as a child, and has become central to Rhaenyra's overall character. So next we go to Dragonstone, and we hear Baela explaining to the lords on Rhaenyra's council that Sir Criston is using the tree cover to conceal Aegon's army's movements, traveling by night to confuse the dragons. She then asks where Cole is headed. Well, she's then asked, where Cole is headed, and she says she believes it is northwest. Sir Broom tells her that she should have burned Cole when she had the chance. And she smartly tells him that perhaps he can do so when he next sights them on his own dragon. which seemed to tickle both Rhaenys and Jacaerys. So Jacaerys then reminds the council that the only reason they know anything is because of Baela's efforts. But Lord Baltimore claims that they do not know enough. Now, Rhaenys explains that they know that Sir Criston has, a host that is growing in strength, and that it is a problem. She's stating the obvious. Lord Massey then asks if Daemon can hope to meet them with a host of his own in time. Now, Lord Baltimore then asks Baela if she has heard word from her father. She answers no. Maester Gerardis explains that the ravens were sent to Harrenhal to ascertain Daemon's progress with no reply. Sir Broom then exclaims that an enemy host growing in constitution marches somewhere in the Crown lands, and that they could perhaps act if only they had a host of their own and someone to lead it. Now, Jacaerys warns Sir Broom to mind his tongue before he asks if it speaks falsely. He goes on to claim that the council is rudderless before Rhaenys interrupts, claiming that she is trying desperately to steer it. Now, Sir Broom then asks why her voice should be louder than theirs. He reminds Rhaenys that the queen did not name her hand, and that it is her voice and that of her king consort that they need to form alliances and command their vassals, but that they are both gone. Now, at that moment, Corlys enters and asks what has become of the council, to which Sir Broom simply responds, "My lord," before sitting. Now, Corlys continues scolding the men on the council for clawing for power in such times. Rhaenys explains that though they do not know the queen's doings, that they must trust that she seeks the same as they do, an end to the conflict at hand. Now, in the next scene, we see the aftermath of a fight between Sir Criston's host and House Darkland of Duskendale, a house that originally supported Rhaenyra, and Sir Criston stands before the men that are left and proclaiming that all who bend the knee to the true King Aegon will be spared, and that they can earn their honor back by raising Aegon's banner and marching in his name against, as he put it, the whore of Dragonstone. My man got bars when it comes to these chicks who do him dirty. He goes on to state that all who refuse will have their death before he dismounts his horse, and we see soldiers carrying Lord Gunther Darkland to the executioner's block, and Sir Criston takes his head in front of the remaining men of Duskendale. And after he does so, the remainder of the army bends a knee as he makes his way back to his horse. Then a squire approaches him with a message that we don't get to see, and this is by design. He gets back on his horse and informs Sir Gawain that they will be following the coastline. Sir Gawain tells him that Harrenhal is to the west of their position. Sir Criston responds simply, "Indeed it is," as he beckons his horse begin to move. And, this is just another battle that we don't get to see. And I understand that, to have a bunch of pitched battles in a single season would have been extremely expensive. But I guess it's just the GOT fan in me that would have loved to see them anyway. A lot of my favorite Game of Thrones episodes were the ones that contained extended battle sequences like Blackwater in Season 2, The Watchers on the Wall in Season 4, Battle of the Bastards, one of my favorites, in Season 6, and, of course, the big one, The Long Night, in Season 8. Though that one was a bit of a letdown if I'm being completely honest, narratively speaking. My point is, I used to get geared up for the penultimate episode every season of Game of Thrones because I knew we were about to get a quality scrap. But I know there are financial realities when it comes to this kind of thing, but seeing the battles, I think, would have helped space out the doldrums of the first 3 episodes, I think. Also, we see that, there are things happening in secret, things that clearly Sir Criston wants to keep from Alicent, and that means the message was likely from Aemon. Remember, Aemon and his mother have been on the outs ever since he killed Lucerys. Also remember that Aemon and Cole were making their own battle plans in Aemon's quarter back in episode 1 of this season. So what's happening now is likely something that has not yet been discussed at the small council, but was probably discussed at great length between Aemon and Sir Criston in the first episode. Anyway, we go to King's Landing and we see Aegon upset about the fact that Daemon has taken Harrenhal, aiming his ire directly at Lord Larys, reminding him that despite residing in King's Landing, that Harrenhal is his effing castle. Lord Larys explains to Aegon that the castle is more crippled than he is and is sure to drive Daemon to madness as he tries to make use of it. He also reminds Aegon that Daemon is penniless as he controls all the castle's gold, and that Harrenhal is sapping Daemon's resolve surely, as Rhaenyra remains trapped on Dragonstone, as Sir Criston continues growing Aegon's army in the Crown Lands, so in his mind, all is going according to plan. Now, Aegon demands to be informed of the goings-on of all things associated with the war so that he might make informed rulings, claiming that he doesn't want to look a fool in front of his allies and enemies. And I get that. Aemon then tells Aegon that Harrenhal must wait and that Sir Criston is marching on Rook's Rest. Aegon explains that he gave no such order, and Aemon explains that the castle is small, weakly defended, and that Lord Staunton sits on Rhaenyra's council. He goes on to explain that once Sir Criston takes the castle, they will have Rhaenyra cut off by land, reminding Aegon that the war will not be won by dragons alone, but instead by dragons flying behind armies of men. Aegon tells him to tell Sir Criston to turn about and that he wants Harrenhal back, and Aemon tells his brother that Sir Criston is already preparing his attack. Now, when Aegon asks Aemon how he knows what Cole is doing, Aemon tells him that Sir Criston sent word to him, which seems to surprise Aegon and the council by the looks on their face. And Aegon accuses Aemon, of plotting behind his back, and, without his authority. Aemon begins speaking in High Valyrian, quite fluently, I might add. Aegon, explaining to Aegon that he had more important things to attend to, like holding court, choosing his sobriquet, meaning his nickname, and appointing imbeciles to his Kingsguard. Then he asks if Aegon has a wiser strategy, that he should voice it to his council. And after an uncomfortable silence, Aegon speaks in what looks to be broken Valyrian, and he says, "I can have to make a war." So Aemon then explains to the council that Harrenhal is useful in that it will keep Daemon well occupied while they strengthen their hosts and weaken Rhaenyra's support on the mainland. That they will then deal with it and the Riverlands in time, but that right now Rook's Rest is an easy target and a worthy effort. Then he asks for Aegon's agreement in front of the entire council. And, this scene was really interesting as it showed a few things. One, it showed that Aemon has gotten sick of Aegon's shit. He's completely over his you-know-what. And so here he is in the small council, absolutely embarrassing him, reading him in front of everybody, proving his incapability as a military tactician. He also proves that he's not afraid to stand up to him, because no one else in the room would have spoken to him like that. Alicent and Otto don't mind reading, Aegon, but neither of them is in the room. Alicent because she isn't feeling so hot, and Sir Otto because he was unceremoniously fired a few episodes back. And two, this is a little payback for the teasing Aegon gave him last episode in the brothel. So next, we're in Alicent's chambers, and we're seeing that she is indeed dealing with the after effects of her special latte, when Lord Larys enters, walking right past the empty cup she left on the table, by the way. She's slipping. And he says that he came in to look on her after she was absent from the small council. He says that he feared that something was amiss. She thanks him for his kindness, but insists that indulgence is her sin, that she ventured too far into the lamprey pie at last night's supper. Now, Lord Larys stares down at the empty cup on the table before responding, that is a rich indulgence. He then goes on to tell Alicent that he believes it is a sin to deny yourself your appetites, that they are what makes the us feel alive as mortals. Now, Larys then sees books on Alicent's coffee table that catch his attention, and Alicent asks if there was anything of note spoken of in the small council meeting. Lord Larys tells her that Daemon has seized Harrenhal, which has displeased Aegon. Alicent responds, telling Lord Larys that she would have thought him to be the most aggrieved. He responds, telling Alicent that he sees it as a loss for a greater good as he flips through the pages of the book. He tells Alicent that Sir Criston has won every challenge that he has faced, and that truth is likely to incite Rhaenyra's fury. He also notes that Alicent must worry for him, with him being her sworn sword and all. Alicent remarks that Sir Criston is the hand of the king and that they should all pray for his safe return. Lord Larys then gets up and he approaches Alicent's position, sitting down before her, and he tells her that that she has not seemed herself as of late. Now, she claims that only weeks ago her lord husband was alive and that the realm was at peace, and that now she has barely had time to grieve one tragedy before suffering the next. Now, Lord Larys then tells Alicent that he did not know that Alicent shared Viserys' love of the histories. Alicent tells him that the voices of history often guided Viserys. He remarks that must be why Viserys changed his mind in the end about his heir. Alicent tells Lord Larys that it is impossible to know what steered his thoughts in the final hours. Lord Larys then asks Alicent if she now doubts Viserys' intentions. Alicent proclaims that Rhaenyra's supporters will believe what they wish, and that so will Aegon's. She goes on to state that the war will be fought, that many will die, and that the victor will eventually ascend the throne. Then she finally says that the significance of Viserys' wishes died with him, and Lord Larys appears to agree. And this is probably the most to-the-point conversation in this entire season, because I've been trying to tell people this very thing, that the Iron Throne has never really been an assigned seat. And that historically, the people who have sat there were people who decided that they wanted to sit there bad enough to kill anyone who had anything to say about it. Point blank, period. So this whole idea about usurping the throne is kind of inconsequential, and it always has been. And almost all of the characters seem to understand this. Well, maybe except Rhaenyra. Now, Rhaenys told Rhaenyra as much back in season 1. Sir Otto told Alicent this all last season. Daemon seems to understand this, and so do many of the very lords who swore fealty to Rhaenyra way back in the pilot. The fact that Rhaenyra, and by extension Viserys, refused to accept this fact for so long is the very reason why this war feels necessary to her. But, honestly, it's not. She could just bend the knee to Aegon and spend the rest of her life grilling and chilling on Dragonstone. But again, she won't do that, not because she has to be queen to unite and protect the realm, but because she wants to be queen, simply put, because her daddy said she could. Because let's dig in for a second. Rhaenyra is not the prince that was promised. We already know this because we watched Game of Thrones and we know who is. And just to be clear, I'm speaking of Jon Snow, not Arya. The literal Song of Ice and Fire. Arya killing the Night King is a whole nother shit show that I don't really have time to get into in this particular video, so I'll just stick a pin in that for now. But Rhaenyra being queen has absolutely no bearing on the battle for the Dawn. Just keep that in mind as we continue moving through the episode, because there's a point where I'm going to go back to that idea. So next we see Daemon in bed in his chambers. He hears a sound coming from outside his room. He jumps up, he draws his sword, and he goes to inquire. And as he exits the room, he sees Aemon, this time, walking around the castle. He follows him until he reaches Alice's workshop, I suppose, and he finds her hard at work. Anyway, Alice properly introduces herself, revealing herself to be a bastard, and Daemon asks Alice if she's a maester. She says yes in a manner of speaking. She claims that she inherited the duties after the last maester fled in the night. Now, when Daemon asks her why the last maester fled, she simply replied, he just never settled in. She asked Daemon how he's settling in, telling him that sleep can be thin inside the castle. Daemon then asks Alice what she could know of his sleep. She tells Daemon that Harrenhal has been cursed since the first stone was laid. She goes on to tell him about how Black Heron felled weirwood trees to build the castle. Those trees being imbued with the spirits of those who lived long before he came, and that their whispers can still be heard. Now, Daemon looks like he doesn't believe her, and he's, claiming the story to be a midwife's tale. Alice reminds Daemon that the bed he sleeps in is made from such trees, and asks if he's experienced anything significant. Daemon tells Alice that she is a strange kind of woman. Alice claims that she isn't a woman at all, but a barn owl cursed to live in human form. Yeah, she's a weirdo. She then tells Daemon that he has come to Harrenhal after quarreling with his wife, that he came alone to claim the castle but haven't yet sent a raven. She then asks if he plans to make his own claim, as in the throne, perhaps to prove himself to her, remarking that it must be hard to give obeisance to the very person who replaced him as heir, and a woman at that, a girl child that he used to bounce on his knee. She asks him if it pleased him that her legitimacy is contested as he stands there with a castle and a dragon, attempting to draw an army of men before handing him a cup containing the concoction she was making for him, apparently, telling him to drink, that he needs his sleep if he's to win the Riverlands to his side, and he does. We then see him in daylight seated at the round table in the hall, speaking with a now grown-up Sir Willem Blackwood about his men. And he tells Daemon that some 20 years ago his lord bent the knee to Viserys and acknowledged Rhaenyra as his rightful heir. Daemon asks Sir Willem if he fights for their oath or for the 1,000-year-old feud with the Brackens. Sir Willem then tells Daemon that he once fought for Rhaenyra's hand before she wed Sir Laenor, and that he always liked her spirit. Daemon asks Sir Willem if he's prepared to march without the leave of his lord, meaning Grover Tully, and just then he sees Laena, his deceased wife, walk into the hall and refresh their drinks, which seems to disorient him for a second. But as he snaps out of his trance, of course it's not Laena, but Sir Willem tells Daemon that once he brings the Queen's justice to the Brackens, that the Blackwood army will be his. And these scenes are just more, watching Harrenhal play its tricks on Daemon. And this is why so many people on the side of the Greens have decided to just let Daemon have that castle for now, claiming that it'll occupy him while they go about the business of solidifying their army and preparing for the war to come. And I think it's kind of interesting that Harrenhal is doing all this to Daemon, and that it's known historically to do this kind of thing to the people who live there. Because, of course, when Tywin Lannister was garrisoned at Harrenhal, we didn't see this magical property doing so much damage to people. But, I mean, I'm with it. I understand that it's in the books and stuff like that, so I don't really have an issue with it, even though it doesn't exactly line up with the original show. Now, next we see Aegon's small council again, and they're talking about how the lords of the Crown Lands are struggling to keep pace with the dragon's appetites, in that, supplying cattle and that kind of thing, especially Vhagar, meaning that Vhagar is already in the Crown Lands. Remember that. They are praising Sir Criston's ability as a military commander, stating that people are calling him Kingmaker, which seems to offend Aegon. Aegon claims that he is bored by the council and he gets up and leaves. Now, Aegon comes across his mother, who asks what happened to Viserys' history books. Aegon tells her that he had them removed before he sits down to have a drink. Now, Alicent asks him what's wrong, kind of patronizing. Oh, what's wrong, baby? And Aegon replies, they don't care what I think. He tells her that Sir Criston and Aemon pursue their campaign without seeking his aid or his thoughts. And Alicent asks what thoughts he would even have. He tells Alicent that he is the king. And we know what your boy Tywin Lannister says about any man who must proclaim to people that he is the king, that he is no true king. But Alicent stares at her son before asking him if he thinks that simply wearing the crown imbues him with wisdom. She tells Aegon that the men on his council had earned their seats, and that she had hoped that once he was enthroned that he would be silent and learn from the more studied minds around him, in the hopes that he might be half the king Viserys was. Which is kind of funny, seeing as how Viserys was a bad king in my opinion. A really good man, but a really bad king. And I suppose Alicent respected him. But, look, it's always easy to see how good of a ruler, president, or whatever dude A was when the train wreck comes after, right? So Aegon tells his mother, he gets a little mad. He tells her to tread carefully. And Alicent calls his bluff, asking him, if he will hang her as he did the rat catchers or have her banished as he did Sir Otto. And she reminds her son that she ruled throughout Viserys' long illness, and that Sir Otto was as cunning a statesman as has ever lived, and that Aegon should humbly be seeking their opinions and counsel, that he has no idea the sacrifices that were made to put him on the throne. And then Aegon, frustrated and bewildered, simply asks his mother what she would have him do. And she tells him to simply do what is needed of him. Nothing. And I was like, a mother should not talk to her son like that. Goodness gracious. Especially one that has so much power and is so thirsty for to be taken seriously, because you just don't know what that will force that person to do, if you feel me. And here, I think this is Alicent finally coming to the conclusion that Rhaenyra was probably right, that she simply misunderstood Viserys on his deathbed, and that he was probably right not to have named Aegon his heir. But I don't know why she wouldn't have seen this with all the crap Aegon got up to as a younger man. I mean, he was a straight up alky, even as a younger man. But I suppose he is her son, and we all know there's nothing like a mother's love. But in this conversation, I think she kind of doomed her son in that she basically told him straight to his face that he was useless. And again, knowing Aegon, like she must, having, pushed him out of her and all, she had to have known that saying something like this to him would have dire consequences, maybe even for herself and her family at some point. And that's why I think the writers need to be careful here, because I'm starting to have a hard time understanding what exactly it is that Alicent wants right now. She seems to have a ethic kind of attitude right now, like, whatever it is whatever it'll be kind of thing. And, it's just kind of weird because in season 1, she loved her kids so much. And in season 2, it's almost like she's like, she doesn't care for them almost at all, with the exception of Helena, who I guess she views as an innocent. But I also think the writers are doing this thing where they're trying to separate out the boys from the girls, because they're really trying to make it seem like all the girls just want to be friends and skip through the streets of King's Landing and living happily ever after, and all the boys want to do is just go to war. But I mean, it doesn't meet out because, again, she's saying Viserys was this great man. She's now saying Otto's a great man, even though she read him a few episodes back, because she claimed that he manipulated her into wanting, what she wanted and all that kind of stuff like that. So I wish, Alicent kind of needs to make up her mind, how she feels. And because everything that she's going through right now and everything that she's doing are just screaming midlife crisis to me. She's been banging Sir Criston and believes it to have cost her a grandchild and her son's heir, but now she acts like she hates him simply because her son made a bad decision by running off her dad, the man who plotted this whole coup in the first place, if you recall. And I don't know, I'm just confused as to what she hopes for in these troubled times. Does she now want Aemon to be king? The son she thinks is a monster? I just don't know. Anyway, next we see Sir Criston's army has arrived at last at Rook's Rest, and they seem to be preparing for a siege. Now, Sir Criston orders the men to prepare for attack. Sir Gawain asks what happened to their plans to move at night and avoid Rhaenyra's dragons, who are positioned at Dragonstone just across the bay. Sir Criston tells Sir Gawain that Lord Staunton will not be expecting them to attack in broad daylight so that they will have the advantage. But he's saying this because he alone knows that Aemon and Vhagar are nearby, and will protect the army from attack by air. Everything that has happened in this episode has led me to believe this, including the note that we didn't get to read, which, like I said, is absolutely from Aemon, and then Aemon sitting in the small council telling Aegon that they're going to attack Rook's Rest. And then in the second small council meeting, Aemon being gone, and they're talking about Vhagar in the Crown Land. So all those things, you kind of knew that this was the deal. Now, Sir Criston asks Sir Gawain if he is afraid, and Sir Gawain tells him that he's not afraid, that he's simply rational. Sir Criston then repeats his command to advance. Next, we finally see Rhaenyra arrive back in Dragonstone, and she walks in on her council as she hears Jacaerys telling the council that they need to send a dragon someplace. When Rhaenyra asks him where, he replies, smartly, to support the war that your vassals have been fighting in your absence, your grace. And boy, Rhaenyra had a look on her face like, who are you talking to like that, little boy? I swear, my mom would have popped me in my mouth, like straight up. I'm just saying. But she did look like she wanted to slap the taste out of his mouth for real. But she was just like, let me relax, relate, release. She is then informed that Sir Criston has increased the size of his forces by adding the men of House Rosby and Stokeworth, and with their combined strength, they sacked Duskendale. So Jacaerys asks Rhaenyra where she's been. She tells him that she went to King's Landing to speak with Alicent to sue for peace. And Jacaerys reminds Rhaenyra that she could have been taken or slain. Like she didn't know that. Rhaenyra reminds Jacaerys that she inherited 80 years of peace from her father, and that before she was to end it, she needed to know that there was no other path. I'll get to that in a minute. Now, Rhaenyra Rhaenys tells Rhaenyra that Cole's army prepares to attack Rook's Rest. Rhaenyra seems confused by that fact. And then Sir Broom basically data dumps all the reasons we heard the Green Council go over in the earlier scenes, so I won't rehash them at this particular point. And Sir Broom claims that they must act. And Jacaerys explains that, again, that they must send the dragon. Now, Rhaenyra pauses for a moment before declaring that there are those who mistake her caution for weakness and that will be their undoing. That's big talk. Now, she declares that she will go to Rook's Rest. I don't know what it is with these two, with Aegon and Rhaenyra, about going to battle themselves, like they don't understand that they're competing monarchs in this particular conflict, and that if either of them were to die, that side would surely lose the war. But I digress. Everybody trying to beat their chest, you know what I mean? But the members of the council explain to Rhaenyra why she cannot, and this is just so weird. Like Rhaenyra doesn't understand this, but okay. Now, Jacaerys volunteers, but Rhaenyra refuses him, claiming that he doesn't have enough experience in battle. And then finally, Rhaenys volunteers, and she does not get an argument from her queen. Now, back in King's Landing, Aegon sits alone in his chambers, deep in thought, and he's kind of playing with a picture of water. Maybe it's wine, I don't know. Probably water, though. And he knocks the picture over in frustration before he stands and exits the room with purpose. So we already know what that means. And back on Dragonstone, Jacaerys approaches his mother in what looks like the Dragonstone library and asks and explains that he only wishes to fight for her claim and his. But Rhaenyra stops him and decides that this is the moment that she chooses to share with him what Viserys told her about the impending threat from the north. And this part was of great interest to me here because Rhaenyra, is telling Jacaerys about the prince that was promised, as if it could be him. But again, we know it's not. And the funny thing is, I understand that they don't know that it's not. But she claims that, she had not previously told him because she wasn't sure she believed in the prophecy. But now that she has agreed to send dragons to war, that decision can't be for a crown alone, which I find to be awfully convenient. And I also contend that if Rhaenyra was so worried about being or producing the prince that was promised, I just feel like she would have done things the way she was supposed to. But she wouldn't, and she didn't. And she's now using the fact that she didn't believe in the prophecy, I suppose, until now, which I just find to be so convenient. So, to act as though the reason she's fighting so hard for the throne is so that she can unite the realm again in order to make ready to fulfill a prophecy that, she's already claiming that she didn't really believe in the first place is straight cap. And it's kind of borderline insulting. And I do actually think the dialogue in this scene, it was bad writing. It was kind of dirty pool by the writers, if you ask me. But as Rhaenyra talks to Jacaerys, we kind of see both Aegon and Sunfire and Rhaenys and Meleys preparing to depart King's Landing and Dragonstone, both of them undoubtedly bound for Rook's Rest. Now, at Rook's Rest, as battle rages, we see Rhaenys on Meleys in the distance. Now, the green soldiers spot the dragon in the air, and most of them, catch out, and they make for the tree line. Now, Sir Gawain rides up to Sir Criston's position, and he basically scolds him, for what's happening. Because, I told you she was going to send the dragon. But Sir Criston tells a nearby soldier to make the signal before reassuring Sir Gawain that everything is going exactly how he planned it. Now, the soldier sounds a horn as Meleys arrives on the field of battle and begins burning Sir Criston's army. And in the distance, we see that Aemon and Vhagar are hiding in the woods nearby. I don't know how near because, Vhagar's pretty big, so it probably would have had to be a little bit of ways away. And there are like 2 or 3 different people that had to blow horns. So, maybe, could it be like 1,000 yards away, maybe? Something, I don't know. But Aemon looks up to the sky from Vhagar's back and sees that Aegon on Sunfire flying overhead. And he looks really frustrated at the sight and commands Vhagar to stand down. And this tells me that that Aemon is kind of having to recalibrate and figure out, okay, what's going to be the new move? Because Aegon's not supposed to be here. Now, Aegon and his dragon finally reach the field of battle, causing Sir Criston to change the plan as well. He addresses the men, commanding them all to advance before looking to the sky for Aemon and Vhagar. Now, Sunfire and Meleys meet over the field, and with Aegon's dragon being very badly injured, as the two dragons kind of claw and scratch and bite at each other. Now, as Meleys continues to attack Sunfire, the much smaller dragon, Vhagar suddenly appears over the tree line. I'm talking about like a 747, like one of them bombers from World War II. I mean, Vhagar is just so much bigger than all the other dragons. But excuse me. He approaches Aegon and Rhaenys' position, and he just breathes fire on the pair, seemingly with no regard for Aegon's safety or that of his dragons, by the way, further injuring both Aegon and his dragon and causing both of them to fall from the sky. Now, Sir Criston, witnessing the sight, he begins to head toward the king's position. Rhaenys then moves to attack Aemon and Vhagar, as the soldiers below look on. Now, the pair of dragons eventually collide, biting and scratching and clawing at each other as they fall from the sky, eventually onto the field of battle below, causing Sir Criston to fall from his horse and be knocked out. And as Vhagar moves across the battlefield on foot, she accidentally, or purposely, because dragons don't give a you-know-what, kills several soldiers on the green side. You know how that is. We've seen that in Game of Thrones. But eventually, becomes airborne again as Rhaenys and Meleys continue to patrol the area from above. And, everything kind of feels like it's calming down a bit, and that Meleys might even be looking to retreat at this point. But as she flies over the castle, headed back out over Blackwater Bay, Vhagar appears out of nowhere, grabbing Meleys by the neck in her jaws, crushing her throat until she renders the body of Meleys lifeless, and Meleys falls, again, lifelessly from the air, and hits the ground, killing Rhaenys in the process. And, I love the shot that they showed here kind of overhead as as Rhaenys kind of realized, okay, this is going to be her great getting up morning. And she just kind of, look, I got to respect that she went out like a G, right? She didn't cry, nothing like that. She just, once Meleys kind of, the life got squeezed out of her and she started to fall, she just kind of looked like she took a deep breath and she was like, okay. Now, so Criston wakes suddenly and looks out over the now ash-covered battlefield, bearing witness to the carnage. And I think this is him kind of realizing how insignificant he now is in a war that involves dragons. Of course, you kind of know what the dragons can do because dragons be dragoning. You know what I'm saying? But I think when you actually see it, you like, golly. When we see big animals, right, we know, for example, that an elephant, if it stepped on somebody, would kill him. But if you were to actually see the elephant step on somebody, you'd be like, oh my God. You know what I'm saying? And I think that's kind of the feeling that Sir Criston has when he wakes from the carnage. But he finally looks around and he locates the king's position in the woods because you can see smoke rising and all that kind of stuff from where the king and Sunfire crashed. So he walks to, the crash site, if you will. And when he gets there, he finds Aemon standing over him with his sword drawn. Now, Sir Criston calls out to him, kind of to be like, what you doing? And Aemon, sheathes his blade. Sir Criston then asks him exactly where the king is, and Aemon, holding his Valyrian steel blade, points to the king's position. And there we see Aegon laying beside his dragon, very badly injured. Sir Criston falls to his knees at the sight, and Aemon simply walks away. And that's when the episode cuts to black. Now, I knew all this was coming, as I told you guys in previous videos. So Rhaenys' death and Meleys' death, and Aegon and Sunfire's near death did not surprise me here. But what I was rather interested in is the fact that Aemon seemed perfectly fine with his brother being hurt during this fight. He even seemed perfectly fine with causing his brother to be hurt during this fight. And, when you juxtapose that with what happened when, Aemon killed Luke, he seems to feel sorry or feel bad for that. But when it comes to Aegon, he's just like, shit happens. You know what I mean? This is why you stay at the castle, like I told you, kind of was his attitude. And, when Aemon approached Aegon and Rhaenys, while they were fighting in the midair, he had Vhagar breathe fire on them with no regard for whether or not Aegon would be injured by his decision. And then at the end of the episode, one has to wonder if Aemon might have killed his brother if Sir Criston had not happened along exactly when he did. Especially when you juxtapose that with Aemon's humiliation at Aegon's hands in the brothel last episode. Now, as for Rhaenys, look, this is why I thought the coronation scene at the Dragon Pit last season was both genius and nonsense, in the way that Rhaenys and her unwillingness to kill the Greens using Melees when she had them all at her mercy ended up being the very decision that killed her. As for the episode as a whole, I thought it was very nicely done, but I expected nothing less. The battle sequence being of particular interest to me, at least. And I think the goal was achieved to finally show us exactly why a war between dragons should have been considered a last resort. Now, as for the show as a whole, I'm seeing a lot of people state that this show is better than Game of Thrones. I'm not ready to say that just yet because I want to remind people that GOT was the best fantasy show on television ever until about season 7. And that it was essentially the last 13 episodes that kind of dragged the show's GPA down to maybe a B- or so. But still, even with all the issues I had with the final 2 seasons of the show, Game of Thrones would still be in my top. If I was making a list of the top 25 TV shows, Game of Thrones would still be on it, and it wouldn't be at the bottom. It would probably be somewhere around about 9 or 10. I think House of the Dragon will certainly be on that list as well, but whether it will come in ahead or just behind of the original show, again, from a narrative standpoint, I'm a screenwriter, just keep that in mind, still in my mind remains to be seen. And, I'm sensing that this story is starting to get away from the writers a bit, especially when it comes to its characters, namely the 2 main characters. Because I've just been able to recall too many scenes containing far too much dialogue, especially, that undermines both Rhaenyra and Alicent's character in the present. And there's just been no need for it, in my opinion. Now, it's clear that so far in this story that Alicent has been jealous of the freedom that Rhaenyra has been able to enjoy while she's been made to do her duty, so to speak. I get all that. But in the second half of season 1, she scolds Aegon, telling him that he needs to get his act together because one day he will be king, and that Rhaenyra may decide to fight and even kill them in order to try to secure their claim. She and her father make a deal with Vaemond Valerion when it looks like Corlys might die, in order to win him to their side in preparation for such a fight. But then the writers boil Alicent's actions on installing her son as king after Viserys' death to a simple misunderstanding instead of a deliberate series of actions designed to protect her family, which I just didn't understand. Because clearly the writers want you to see Alicent as a villain, which could have been brilliant if it had been executed correctly. And as for Rhaenyra, it was the first half of the season 1 that confused me, because the writers could have simply had her claim be disputed because she was a girl and nobody wanted to have a girl in charge, without all the extra nonsense, because that would have made Rhaenyra much easier to root for, which is clearly what they want the audience to do here. I mean, why the affair with Sir Criston? Like, you didn't even need it. Why the 3 bastard children with Sir Harwin? Why have her fake Sir Laenor's death when he could have just decided to leave her instead? In fact, I think that whole plot point now plays much better if Sir Laenor had just left her. Like one night he just got in a boat with his lover and just caught out. And then Rhaenyra had to clean up the aftermath after the fact. Why, if her claim is already being heavily contested, have her leave for Dragonstone instead of staying in King's Landing to keep an eye on the very people so clearly trying to steal her inheritance. And I know a lot of you will say, well, this is what happened in the books. But as Game of Thrones showed us, the TV show doesn't have to follow the books verbatim. They are simply based on the material from said books. And this narrative have gotten really complex and complicated to the point where the writers don't even seem to know what the main characters want anymore and why, because there are so many scenes, even from episode to episode, that completely speak to different motives and different feelings about said motives. Nevertheless, House of the Dragon remains appointment television, and I believe it will continue to be so until the last Targaryen falls. But what do you guys think? Did you enjoy the 4th episode of the new season? What's your favorite storyline so far? Let me know in the comments. And for those of you that might be new to the channel, be sure to like and share this video. If you really like the content, be sure to subscribe and hit that notification bell. That way you'll be notified whenever I drop a new video. Also, be sure to go and check out themaskscreenwriter.com for more television and film reviews and info on my upcoming film projects. And with that, I'm going to go ahead and get out of here. I got screenplays to write. And I'll catch y'all in the next video.